Hi everybody, it's Mary and it's so right. Going to be sewing on a button with the machine. This is the only thing I was ever afraid to do. It took me a while, but I got past it. You know that a jacket that has the buttons on the sleeve? Well, imagine trying to put your hand in, up, down, sewing on buttons onto a sleeve. Well, that's what got me to the machine to do it. So sewing on a button. First, you're going to make sure that you have interfacing inside. So if this is your outside fabric, you have your facing on the other side. Make sure there's interfacing. And I do like using tearaway stabilizer underneath everything. So now I got to set up the machine. I'm going to get my button sew on foot, which looks like this. And I'm on the Brother Pacesetter. It's the PS500. And I'm going to put on this foot. But before I continue, I want to make sure that I put down the feed dogs, because you don't want it pulling the fabric while it's sewing on a button. So I'm going to disengage the feed dogs. I'm going to pull off my accessory tray, and in the back there's a switch. And you pull it over to the right, and now the feed dogs are disengaged. I'll take the foot off so you can see they're disengaged. The other thing is, I'm going to slide this back on, is that for this particular technique, I prefer to bring my bobbin thread to the surface, so I don't put it in the cutter. After I put it in and I pull it under the tension, I'm going to hold my top thread and I'm going to bring my bobbin thread to the surface. It's just something that I prefer to do. I'm going to put on my bobbin cover, and now I'm going to put on the button sew on foot. Now, I refer to these like cooking tongs. This opens up and your button is going to slide in there. And these little red lines are going to line up with the holes in the button. I'm going to do the two holes closest to me first, because this is a four-hole button. So I'm going to do the first two. Then after it does those, I'm going to pull it forward and do the other two in the back. But first I'm going to do these, and I'm going to put this on the machine. And you usually have to give the ankle a lift, because right now that's down. Here's up, but I'm going to give it another boost so that I can get this under here. And I'm going to lower the ankle onto the foot. Now the foot is not all the way down yet. Now it is. So I'm going to go into my settings, and I'm going to pick the stitch that is to sew on the button, which is in another menu. So I have to come to this menu, which over here on my keypad looks just like that. I'm going to touch this, and the button sew on is stitch 68. So everything is set up. Another thing, this button has the holes on the top. If you have a button that does not have the holes and it has the shank underneath, avoid those at all costs. Try to get the buttons that you can sew on the machine, so you don't have to hand sew on buttons. All right, I'm going to lift my foot, give it a boost. Even though it is not all the way down, right now it's still hard to put this in here because of this foot with the button. So I'm going to give it a boost, and I'm going to slide this under, and you're going to decide where you want your button sewn on. I'm just going to place it under there. And remember, I spoke about tearaway stabilizer. I'm just going to scoot this. Here, I'm going to pull that back out a minute. I'm going to put this underneath everything. Give it another boost. So I'm going to sew on my button. And because I put the foot down, I've got green. Green for go. Now, even though I positioned it when I was holding the foot with the little red dots and the holes, something could have shifted. So now I'm going to be testing it and seeing if the needle with the hand wheel. Don't use needle up and down, and don't push on the foot pedal on the floor until you know that the needle is going into each hole. If it wasn't, you would raise the foot and you would reposition the button, and then try and make sure you put the foot down. Okay, I'm gonna test it. And now that I know it's exactly where I want it and it's stitching in the holes of the button, then don't be afraid. just give it the gas, and the machine is going to stop after it does the number of stitches that's required. Now I'm going to lift the foot, and I'm going to pull it forward a little bit so the other two holes are exposed. And I put the foot down, but before I push on the gas, I'm going to test it again. And it's good. So now I let it finish. And then you can trim. So my button is sewn on. Now, I did use the trimmer. And I'm going to say I did it on purpose so I can explain this to you. When you use the trimmer, the tail of the bobbin is still down there. But because of the height of the button, when you go to sew the next button on, sometimes the top thread can't grab the bobbin thread. That's why I said before, I like to bring my thread to the top, and in the future buttons, sewing on the button, I will not use the cutter. I'm going to just bring my bobbin thread to the top again, because I want to show you something else. So I'm going to cut this button off. What if you want a shank? There's times that you've bought a garment, and if you look in between the button and the fabric, you're going to see thread wrapped around under the button, and that creates a shank. Why do you want a shank? Shanks are important most of the time, because if you sew your button on just like I did a minute ago, your button is going to be very snug, and then sometimes it's hard to button. If you make a shank that raises the button just a little bit, you have that room that it'll be easy to push the button through the buttonhole. So now, how do you do a shank? I'm going to raise this up again. I'm going to place my button under the foot. And there's this little switch on the side of the foot. This little piece right here. When I push it, I'm going to raise it. I'm going to push it forward. All right, wait. This is going to be easier if you do this before you put on the foot. This little lever, you're going to push it towards you. And if you look inside here, when I do that, a little stem came on top of the metal stem that's underneath it. Now that's the thing that's going to help create the shank. So now I'm going to put this back under here, put the foot back on. Oh, make sure my thread's not going to get caught in there. And I brought that stem forward. I'm going to do the same exact process again. I'm going to put my button inside the tongs. I call them the tongs. Position the holes in between the red lines. Put the foot down, holding my top thread. The foot is down. I've got green, but I'm not pushing on the pedal until I know my needle lands in each hole. Once I do that, I let it go. Okay, now I got to do the other two holes behind it. I'm going to raise the foot. I'm going to pull it forward. I'm not cutting the thread. Again, I'm going to there, the needle's hitting the button. I didn't position it quite right. Don't you know I did that on purpose so you could see? There's the other two. Give it the gas. Oh, I didn't put the foot down. Now, the button is not sewn on tight. You take a long thread and you're going to pull it to the wrong side. Let me get my seam ripper out. That'll help me. I'm not going to rip the stitches. I'm only going to use it to grab a thread. So, in between the button and the fabric, I want to grab the loose thread. Okay, so now I've got the thread that's coming out the top. I'm going to pull this one to the wrong side. The other thread you can trim, but this thread, you trim that one, get it out of the way. Now you take your other thread and you wrap. You've created a shank. So then with your hand needle, you can make a knot and then trim it close, and there's your button sewn on. Hope you enjoyed that, and hope you're gonna sew on all your buttons on the sewing machine. Don't be afraid. Just remember, hand crank the wheel, making sure the needle gets in each hole. Then give it the gas. Have a good day. Bye.